Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking about episode 4 of season 3 of The Walking Dead called The Killer Within. First of all, I have to apologize for getting this video out a little bit later than usual. I've been kind of sick the last few days, and Monday when I normally do these reviews for Walking Dead, my voice was a complete and utter wreck. So it's only until yesterday that I really could talk well. So let's put it that way. So this I'm still not 100%. I'm like 90%. So this review might be a little bit shorter than usual, just because I'm not 100%, and I maybe have forgotten a few of the things that I wanted to talk about originally. But I've still got my notes. I've still got some things I want to talk about. So let's get right into this episode. I think really the theme for this episode is very much hard choices. The world in which our characters find themselves is very much full of this. It is a world that is very gray. The characters are really finding themselves having to do things, especially Rick. This is really what's going on. The big driving thing with his character lately is Rick having to make these really hard, very morally ambiguous choices. For example, what he did when he killed Tomas a couple of episodes back. Now, granted, killing somebody in cold blood on the spot is not something that really Rick, certainly not when he was a regular cop, would have ever even considered doing. And even in season 1 and 2, it's just simply not something he would have done without giving it some serious hemming and hawing. Kind of like when he sort of realized that Shane had murdered Otis, but didn't really do much of anything about it. Well, that's not the man that Rick is now, and what we see in this episode really does drive this home in regards to his treatment of Axel and oh darn, I forgot the other fella's name. Oscar? Is it? I believe it might be Oscar. If it's not, please forgive me. I'll go look it up later. But anyway, this is actually really reminds me a lot of a speech that Rick gives in the prison at one point during the comics, and he talks. And I'm not going to spoil it, but I'm just going to give you the general gist of it. And he basically says that the old rules don't apply anymore. The world that they came from is gone. The world where they could just, if there was a bad person, they'd just stick that person in prison. They're, in a way, because of what has happened, have had to revert to, frankly, an almost literally medieval system of justice. Now, if you think about how things were in Europe in the old days, and in fact in most of the world, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, if you committed a crime, well, unless it was something reasonably minor things that you could get off with a fine or something like that, well, your choices were basically for punishment: execution, exile, maybe having your hand chopped off, being enslaved. And the reason, of course, that we don't do that in modern society is, one, we've had centuries to consider and refine and think about the way that we live. In fact, I believe it was Socrates who said that the art of philosophy is asking the question, how then should we live? And it's very tempting in our modern society to look at people back in those old days and think that they did those sort of things just because they were stupid or because they were bad. But that's really an extraordinarily myopic view of the world. People today and people in the olden times are still just as human as we are. I mean, we as human beings, our nature has really, in my mind, not really changed that much. It's people who we, in modern times and in people in ancient times, are always people trying to make the best choices we can in the circumstances we find ourselves in. And simply back in those times, life was a lot harder. You didn't have the luxuries that we have today, such as the easy availability of food. In those olden times, the possibility, even in what we would consider the first world countries, like in Europe and various places like Japan, if things went wrong, there really was a real possibility that you could starve to death. So throwing somebody in jail, that just meant that you had another mouth to feed. Now, it doesn't mean that what those people did back then was morally right. But on the other hand, it's very easy to pass judgment on people looking back over the centuries from our safe and comfortable position here in the 21st century, where most of us from the developed world, the first world, don't really have to worry about starving to death. We don't have to really worry about an army marching through our cities and destroying our homes and enslaving people, killing things. This in our modern time, this isn't really something that most of us have to worry about. That was the reality that people in those times did have to live with, and they they just simply could not afford to show the kind of mercy that we can. Now, let's not get really political here about what you might think about the death penalty or the modern prison systems or anything like that. What we're really talking about here is just the circumstances we have. Rick and the guys in the prison, they don't really know for sure where their next meal is going to come from. Sure, they've got enough in the prison to last them for a while, and they've got the possibility of growing some crops, and there's animals and all this other stuff around. But again, they can't just afford to throw Tomas and his friends back in their cells and just keep them there. So their only choice is really to kind of revert back to that more, I don't want to go say primitive, I just want to, or savage or anything like that. Really, again, medieval is the word that is best, because this is a world with very few laws. This is a world really where the only law is what you make for yourself at the end of a weapon. And unsurprisingly, if you look at societies when they are in that stage, I mean, look at the way things were often handled in the Old West. Sure, they had laws and judges and things like that, but a lot of the time, people, if there was a problem, well, they'd just go grab their guns and sort it out themselves. And that's also true in many other places across the world throughout history. Actually, if you really want a more realistic comparison to the Walking Dead world, forget the Old West. Look at modern day Somalia. That is the kind of situation our heroes find themselves in. So again, they really can't afford to be the kind of generous people that they would have been before the world went to hell. And this is also what's going on over in Woodbury. We've already picked up on the fact that the governor and his crew are doing some pretty nasty stuff, including murdering National Guard guys just for their vehicles and weapons, and for the fact that they might have potentially been a threat to the governor's authority. Now, you can, of course, and that's certainly not a morally acceptable thing, but on the other hand, you can sort of see how that choice might seem like the best viable option given the circumstances. The governor and the people of Woodbury, they do have a safe haven. They do have a place where they can breathe easy, where they have some hope for the future. And yeah, having some experienced military guys around would certainly have been super helpful. But, there's also the idea that, and this is certainly probably was on the governor's mind, that the people might look to the guys who are, did say they were National Guard troops, but the quote-unquote trained professionals, and please don't take that as me disrespecting anybody in the National Guard, okay? I'm just saying there's a difference between folks who are in the National Guard and folks who are... oh, man. There is no way I'm going to try and clarify my point without offending someone. I'm sure you kind of get what I'm driving at here, okay? But anyway, so it is a very hard choices that people are trying to make here. And the question, of course, is where do you stop? Where do you say, I've compromised my morals enough? If I cross this line, then all I have left is survival. And the question then is, well, is survival enough? Are you willing to abandon all morality just to survive? And it looks like in the most case, the governor's a guy who's very much on the yes side of the equation. Now, maybe he hasn't abandoned all morality, but he's certainly willing to go a lot further than Rick or any of the other guys are. And I do have to say, speaking of the governor, I did really get a kick out of that scene of him playing golf and occasionally beating walkers with golf balls. That was a much needed funny moment in what's been a really kind of a very grim season. And I suppose I might want to clarify for folks who aren't from the U.S. As I understand it, and I'm not an expert on golf by any means. Augusta is home to a rather famous golf course that does not allow women to play on it. It's the South. Okay, the old boys club still has quite a bit of sway down there. So when Merle was talking about taking the women up there to play at Augusta, that's what he was making a reference to. Now, the relationship between the governor and Andrea, this is some interesting stuff. He's very much kind of being the guy who's there offering the temptation. He's sort of strong sort of fella, more than a little reminiscent of Shane, who Andrea was slightly involved with last season, with some stuff that I'd really prefer not to recall because it was, yeah. And he's also, of course, offering her a safe haven. Now, while, obviously hanging around with Michonne is cool and all, there's definitely an appeal to being in a town with electricity and does the town have electricity? Well, close enough. Having a real bed, having normal food, having something that seems like a real normal life. And it is obvious that Andrea is attracted to this guy. So there is that. And the governor, of course, is not above exploiting this. And it's interesting to also see the relationship between Merle and Andrea. That Andrea is willing to sort of at least look at Merle as a person a little bit. Of course, there's also the fact that she kind of shot his brother in the head, which, of course, she doesn't mention, which is probably wise given how Merle would probably react to that. But I do like that it does show that these two people can connect to some degree on a human level. And as bad a person as Merle is, he does still have, I don't know if I should say morality, but he does still have some humanity in him. He desperately wants to find his brother again. His loyalty to the governor is genuine. He is genuinely grateful to this man who saved his life. And that really adds some richness to his character because, let's face it, in season 1, Merle, except for that scene where he was kind of freaking out on the roof about how he was going to die a pretty nasty death, was kind of a really one-dimensional guy who was just, you could easily write off as the racist jerk. Now, I have to say, I really enjoyed that scene between Michonne, and I hope I'm saying that right. They've only said her name like 2 times since the character's been introduced, so I'm not 100% on that still. The scene between her and the governor. Yeah, that was just wonderfully tense, and I love how Michonne is nobody's fool. All right, this is a smart lady. And seeing that very obvious tension between them. See, it's sort of like watching two tigers sort of stalk each other right before they go at it. And if you're familiar with what happens between Michonne and the governor in the comics, well, you can understand why, yeah, this could be really, really, really ugly. Speaking of the governor, I was a little surprised that he did give out his name. From what I can tell, he isn't lying. His name really does appear to be Philip. This is based on what's came out in the Rise of the Governor novel that was written by Robert Kirkman, The Walking Dead's creator, and some additional supplementary material. If you really poke around in the Walking Dead universe, you can actually, it's not too hard to suss out what his family name most likely is, but just in case it might become a point later on, I won't spoil that for you guys. Honestly, if you poke around on the Walking Dead wiki, you can find it in almost no time at all. So there is that. Now, let me see. Yeah. Moving back to the prison. First of all, I have to say, they continue the theme of giving fans what they want and redressing the problems that were serious in season 2. And by that I mean they killed Lori and made Carl useful. Now, I really did have a feeling that Lori was not going to be lasting too much longer, simply just because she's not terribly popular with the fans, and this is kind of where she exited the story in the comics. Sorry if that's a spoiler for you guys, but I think at this point it's kind of that little spoiler is somewhat justified. Now, I do have to complain about the fact that, like is so common on TV, TV wants you to think that women who are pregnant give birth within an hour of going into labor. Look, folks, I'm not a doctor, but I know sure as heck that ain't true. And also, apparently, after giving out that little cry that we know, so that we know the baby is alive, did you notice how quiet the baby got? Look, I've never been around a kid being born or when a kid was born. I mean, like within the immediate seconds afterward. But I'm pretty sure they at least cry for a little while. And yeah, you really would think the zombies would kind of hear that. Okay, sorry, my voice is starting to get a little off, so I might have to start wrapping this up. But again, it's TV, so expediency is the order of the day. And the scene between Laurel and Carl, that was certainly some very well written, very well acted, good stuff. The idea of Carl becoming this harder, darker character because he's a child who's growing up in this harder, darker world, and he's growing to fit this world. Lori is not oblivious to this. I mean, look at the way she freaked out when he just sort of casually mentioned going to the infirmary and bagging 2 walkers along the way. So her speech to him about how he needs to remain a good person is really something that Carl is obviously going to take to heart. And it's going to be something that I think is really going to be a guiding force in his character, in his life from this point onward. And let's face it, Carl's pretty hardcore for shooting his mom in the head so that she wouldn't become a zombie. I mean, dang, Carl, that's impressive. Now, there's the issue of Andrew being alive. Okay, this is doubtlessly extremely improbable. And why didn't Rick and the guys go back to that courtyard to, one, make sure Andrew was dead, or at the very least, kill the zombies that they knew were there? The fact that they didn't do this just makes them seem like idiots. Now, yeah, I'm really going to have to wrap this up. My voice is about spent. So, we also come to the big confrontation between Andrew, Rick, and Oscar. And of course, Oscar makes the choice to side with Rick, thus showing that he and Axel are not bad guys, like Axel has been saying, that they do perhaps have a place within the group. And I thought that was really quite well done. Not to get really, just not to editorialize here too much, but I've known people who have gone to prison. And it's like Axel said, that not everybody there was a bad person. In fact, the people I've known who've gone to jail were all people who, frankly, by their own admission, just did something really, really stupid. Now, of course, that isn't true for everybody. Of course, there are genuinely really bad people who are in jail who deserve to be there. But at the end of the day, I guess we should always just remember that folks who are in prison are still human. And they should be judged by their deeds and the contents of their characters. And Rick, he was judging these guys by where they were. He was judging them by their deeds rather than by their characters. And that was his mistake, because seriously, Rick, did you think that you're going to be able to toss these guys in that cell block and that you're never going to see them again even though you're planning to live in this prison? Of course, we have also lost T-Dog this episode. You guys, T-Dog is one of those guys who's just sort of never really quite gelled as a character on the show, but I do like the way that he went out. He died very nobly. I like that despite everything, he held on to his religion. You know, in this sort of world, it would be very easy to mock a character for still having faith in God in the sort of circumstances, but nobody does that to T-Dog. And it doesn't really seem like people do that to anyone on the show. People question how what happens relates to God, but nobody kind of laughs at anybody about it. Okay, folks, my voice is really about to go, so I'm going to have to wrap it up here. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe, and of course you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. Until next time, take care and have a good one.